Hey guys, Joshnic here. Now in today's video I'm going to be teaching you how to DJ, and this one is geared towards beginners. If you are experienced and know how to DJ, don't worry, I do have a part 2 coming out next week which is going to cover a lot more advanced techniques and might teach you a few things that you might not know yourself. Today's video is basically going to cover 3 main things. Firstly, beat matching. Secondly, using EQs. And thirdly, how to use the actual DJ equipment, and just covering some of the main things that you're going to be using, or at least when you're starting out as a beginner DJ. So getting into the basics of mixing, the first thing I truly believe you need to nail first before anything is beat matching. If you can't beat match, it doesn't matter how good your transition is, how clean anything else is with your mixing. If your tracks are out of sync with each other and the beats aren't in line, it's just going to sound like a complete mess. For any kind of newcomer to DJing who needs to learn beat matching, I strongly recommend anything that's between 120 to 130 BPM is the best place to start, just because if you're trying to jump into DJing, learning something like trap, dubstep, basically anything that's really fast, it's just going to overwhelm you and you're just not going to have a good time. So I'll just pull up some house tracks here and I'll give you an example of just sort of where to begin. Also, the good thing about house is a lot of tracks will have longer intros with just a solid kick, which makes it really easy to learn how to beat match. What I would recommend doing before even getting into trying to, sync up songs, before trying to mix songs together, just get a song on a loop like this. Now that you've got your loop going, you want to get your other track. Now with your decks you might have a slightly different layout to what I have here, but essentially what you need to do when mixing is you need to be queuing in the track that you're going to be bringing in. So if you press this button here, then if you start playing the next track, right now you can't hear anything, but I can hear it through my headphones. Now what you can do with this part here, that essentially changes how much of the cue track you're listening to and how much of the master you're listening to. Right now it's set at 50%, so I'm hearing the volume coming from that track, which I've currently got filtered down, plus the track that's going in my headphones. Both are at equal volumes. If I bring it all the way to cue, I'll only hear that track in my headphones, the cue track. I won't hear the track that's currently playing. Or if I turn it all the way to the other end, I'm not going to hear that cue track, and I'm just going to hear what is currently playing through the speakers. Hence the master. Everything coming through there is what you'll hear here. Now, I like to have mine never really past 50%. I sometimes will adjust it. Depending on how loud the club is, I may need to adjust this, until I can kind of hear what's happening with the song. Anyways, get the song that you've got playing, get a loop going, and you want to cue in this track. I would suggest putting it on a loop as well. So, and then once you've got your loop at the end, you just want to press the out button and that'll create a loop. So now you've got 2 tracks going. One's playing through the speakers, one's playing through your headphones. And you want to practice, and what I do is kind of have one ear cup off my ear. So I'm not too sure if you can see, but I actually have this one off whilst the other one is on. That's so I can hear what's happening through the speakers as well as the song that I'm about to bring in through my headphones. And you want to just practice moving the wheel forwards and backwards to try to work out, which direction it needs to go to stay in key, in sync. Now, one other thing I would recommend as well while you're learning is get rid of this. So just open something up, that way you can't even see the beats going. It's very easy to rely on looking at it, but I would strongly recommend just completely removing those waveforms. That way you're training to use your ears, not your eyes when mixing, because your ears are the most important part of being a DJ, other than knowing how to mix, of course, but your ears need to be working so that you can bring in songs and keep them in sync. So, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to have both tracks at the same volume. And I'm going to slowly bring this one up. Now I'm just going to purposely move this out of sync. So right now you can hear both tracks are, not in beat. Now what you need to practice is just moving this until you hear them slowly come together. Now that sounds pretty spot on to me. Now if you want to just double check, go back now and you can see this is always not 100%, but I can see here that they're both of these tracks are basically in sync with each other. Now once you've got the hang of doing that, it's time to start mixing your tracks in for real. Now what I recommend with mixing, if you can see where my memory points are located, it's a quick and easy way to skip between the parts of the track. So this and this are part of the intro, that is part of the break, that's the build up, and that's the drop. That's how I've set my memory points up, just so it's easy for me to work out which part of the song I can start mixing in. And also, if you were to say start mixing in from any one of these points, it's always going to be in the right phrasing. So I've seen some DJs where they'll basically start mixing in like this. Now, if you could see, that first track is actually one whole bar before the other track. There. Please don't do that. I've seen so many DJs do that. It doesn't sound good. If you can remember to keep each track mixed in at the same phrasing, then it's always going to work. An easy way to count whether it's in phrase or not is you want to count 8 bars. So what a bar is basically the distance from this red line to the next red line. So what you do is go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're up to the next 8 blocks of bars. 2, 3, 4. And just listen, because you're going to hear the song change. Every 8 bars there's going to be, new elements added to the track where it's going to change. 2, 3, and on the drop, on the next 8 bars, that's when the build-up's going to start. 6, 7, 8, now the build-up's going to start. And pretty much all electronic dance music is structured like this, just because it makes it super easy to DJ, and it just seems to make a lot of sense. Now, once you get a bit of experience, you'll be able to even just look at the waveform and kind of guesstimate how many lots of 8 bars, each section of the track is. So if I'm looking here, I would guess that's about 16 bars there. That's another build-up, and then there's another 16 bars there. So if we just go and have a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Seems like another build up. In fact, what the fuck am I doing in the... And then another 16 bars for the second part of the drop. Now, understanding this phrasing and the 8 bars, 8, 16 bars will really help you with just knowing when is the right time to bring in your track, when you can mix out of the track. And also, if you're, say for instance, you're running out of time to bring in the next track, say you're going to do a drop swap, this is getting a bit more complicated, but say you're going to be swapping drops on the build-up, what I technically will do is I'll go to the part where I plan on changing the tracks, hence the drop, and I will actually bring it back and I will count each bar until I say get 4 bars in, I wait for 4 bars to go through in the build-up and then start mixing. So a perfect example is like this. Oh crap. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. That was a really bad mix, but that's just a really good example of how you can use phrasing to quickly, you know, work out where you can mix a track in, even if you're doing it last minute. Another thing with mixing is, say for instance, we've got this drop here. We plan on bringing this next song in, and we're going to change it over on this part. What you need to do is, when you have two tracks playing at the same time, don't have the bass going on both of them. It's going to sound bad. Make sure that the track you're bringing in, you're going to have the bass all the way down. That way, as you start bringing it in, the basses aren't going to collide. It's just going to sound a lot cleaner. And then once it's time to swap tracks, just do that. And then you're going to have a really clean mix. So perfect example, I'll just do an intro outro mix. This is the easiest way to mix house music. And I'll show you exactly how you can use this technique so it's clean. See, if I have both basses going, it just doesn't sound as clean. And that allowed the tracks to go through really smoothly. Now, another thing you can do, depending on the type of music you're playing, with house you don't need to do this as much, but another thing you can do to really make that transition from one track to the other really smooth is by using the mid knob. The way I use the mid knob when mixing is, if say the second track I'm bringing in has some really loud drums or vocals, or there's something going on in that track where if I'm just doing my standard mixing, it's still too loud when mixed over the top of the other track. So what you can do is trim the mids down more to just really suck out some of the harshness of that track while still mixing it in, and then you can gradually start mixing that in. Now, with the actual using of EQs, when I mix, I tend to try to keep everything either at 12 o'clock or one will be less than the other. So for instance, if I'm mixing a track in, I'll eventually do this, and then same with the bass, they'll eventually both swap. I'll just show this in practice, and then you can kind of see how I'm using these techniques. See how the mids toning down the drums a bit, and then I'll bring them up a bit. And then once these 8 bars are over, I'm going to swap the basses, or swap the low EQs, and that will make this transition really smooth. So that's a couple things there. You know, basically, if you can nail these few steps down, then that's just going to make your DJing really clean, and it's going to make the rest of the learning process a lot easier for you. So basically, 2 things to nail down: keeping tracks in sync, learning how to, you know, coax it back and forth until you can hear them kind of just align, and then also just learning how to use EQs when mixing. Never have 2 basses going at the same time. There are minor exceptions for this, but just as a general rule of thumb, don't keep 2 basses up at the same time. And then you can also tweak the mids as well if the track is just sounding a little bit too harsh when mixing it in. If you can nail these 2, your mixes are going to sound super clean. Now, there are just a couple of other things that I'm just going to touch on just regarding the actual, you know, DJ equipment itself, not so much the mixing side of things. One thing to start off with is this knob here, the trim. This basically kind of is a knob to basically trim the overall volume of that channel, or the levels of that channel. And you can see here that they're sitting at about 9. Now, if I bring that trim up, you're going to start redlining. There's no point in redlining. You're going to damage equipment. It's not going to sound good. Just don't do it. If you're a little bit worried of redlining, or if you're at a place where they're super strict on redlining, I would even bring this down so you're kind of hitting about This says 5 on my decks, some may say 8, but you kind of want it to sit just sort of flickering between the last orange light and the second last orange light. You can have it up, but it just means you're going to run into the risk of redlining a bit more. If you find your track is redlining at all, or it's just getting a bit close, just bring that trim down. It's not going to make a huge difference in terms of the levels in the room, and you know, you're going to save the equipment and keep the club happy as well. Other few things as well. Now, this slider will actually change the speed of the track. So these two tracks, for example, that I've been using, this track is 124 BPM, that is 126 BPM. What do you do when you want to mix the two together? Don't just hit play and try and bring it in, it's always going to stay out. Either bring this one up to 126 or bring that one down to 124. Really doesn't matter, it's up to you which way you want to go. Now, with the actual tempo slider, if you press this button, that's going to change the amount the tempo will change. I like to have it on 10, it seems to give me the most flexibility, and that's what I'm used to. Some people use 16, some use 6. I've very rarely ever seen someone use wide. Now, I'll show you what the difference between each other is. So say if I bring this about halfway, that's moved it up 3.74% in speed, up to about 128 BPM. Now, other few things as well. If you want to do a loop, like I was doing before, if you hit the Q button, that's going to set like a Q point there, and then all you need to do is hit the out button on the loop buttons, and that's going to create a loop. If you don't hit that Q button, it's going to start the loop from wherever you last hit Q. Otherwise, just say for instance you're playing your track and you decide you want to loop a certain bit of it, the in dictates where the start of the loop will be, and out shows where the end of the loop will be. So say I want to loop just one particular piece, just like that. In to do the start, out to do the end. And you can change the length of the loop with these two buttons here. So if you press the right, that's going to double the length of the loop, so it's going to go from 2 bars to 4 bars, or 2 beats to 4 beats, I get confused. Out to 8, out to 16, out to 32, 64, 128. You get the picture. Or if you go all the way down, so that's really handy. And then you just press this button to exit the loop. Now, for whatever reason, if you want to go back into that loop, just press that button, and it's going to take you back to the loop that you originally made. Now, some other things as well. This is personal preference. For beginners, I would recommend having your jog mode set to CD. It will say CD on CDJs. On here, you just toggle that off and that will activate CD mode. Now, what that means, if I have vinyl mode switched off, so it goes onto CD mode, and I hit play, if I hit pause, it's actually going to just sit where it is and kind of repeat itself. Now, the benefit of turning vinyl mode off is so you can't accidentally, spin it back or actually put your hand on and stop the music. You can slow it down or speed it up a bit, but it's not actually going to interrupt the music, which is something you can do and probably will do when you're starting out. I've done it heaps of times. If you turn vinyl mode on, that will allow you to do things like that, like you would on an actual vinyl disc. And then that also means if you were to put your hand on the platter, it's going to stop. Something you want to avoid when starting out, just because it is really easy to kind of make mistakes. You will make mistakes, and if you're not experienced, you're probably going to freak out if you do make a mistake, and that's the last thing you want to do because it can hurt your confidence, and it's just, try to avoid it. And one other thing, just before I wrap this one up, this is something that I started out doing, which, try not to do this, it's just bad practice essentially. With mixing, 99% of DJs will mix with the channel faders. So you've got one track playing, you bring the next one up, you bring one down as such. When I first started DJing, I had to teach myself. No one taught me how to do anything. I just kind of picked it up. I thought it'd be fun to do, so I just taught myself. I taught myself using the crossfader. While that does essentially the same thing as doing this, you don't really have a lot of control as opposed to bringing up each individual track individually. And also, if you're using the crossfader, say you've got one track playing, if you're just, dancing, having a fun time, and oops, accidentally do that, then if you don't have a track playing, it's going to sound, I don't know, something like this. And then you're going to freak out, what's happening? Where's the music going? It's going there. Where? Oh. Yeah, don't do that. And make sure your crossfader curve is through. That way, if you move it, it's not going to actually affect anything. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope I've been able to teach you a couple of things. Hope I've been able to get you guys on the right track, and then you can start DJing yourself. Anyways, stay tuned for the next episode. I've got advanced mixing techniques coming out next week, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Activate radio contact with the outside.